Keanu Reeves, humble and unassuming, schools a wealthy, arrogant woman on true success, proving kindness outshines wealth. Who will win this battle of values? Keanu Reeves stood in the first-class line at Heathrow Airport, dressed in his usual understated style, a simple black t-shirt, well-worn jeans, and boots that had clearly seen better days. Around him, the terminal buzzed with a mix of business executives, wealthy travelers, and influencers flaunting designer luggage. Keanu, however, carried nothing more than a weathered canvas duffel slung over his shoulder. He blended in, yet somehow still stood apart. Behind him in line stood Veronica Hawthorne, a 60-year-old real estate mogul exuding the kind of presence that demanded attention. Her tailored silk suit, diamond earrings, and flawless hairstyle screamed status. The staff rushed to accommodate her, and nearby passengers stole glances at the powerful woman who was clearly accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Her sharp eyes landed on Keanu, and a barely concealed smirk curled her lips. "First class, huh?" she said, her voice laced with amusement. "Didn't realize they started letting just anyone in these days." Keanu turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, it's strange how planes work. You buy a ticket and they let you on." Her smirk faltered for half a second before she laughed softly, shaking her head. "Nothing personal, but you don't exactly fit the profile of a first-class traveler." She eyed his worn-out boots and simple duffel bag. "Unless you won the lottery?" Keanu didn't react, simply offering a small, polite smile before turning back toward the gate. He'd dealt with people like Veronica before, people who equated wealth with superiority, who believed kindness was a sign of weakness. He wasn't interested in a debate, but fate had other plans. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, and the first-class line began to move. Veronica walked with an air of absolute confidence, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she strode toward the jet bridge. Keanu followed at his usual unhurried pace, seemingly unaffected by the judgmental stares around him. But the universe has a funny way of humbling the arrogant. As Veronica reached her seat and checked her ticket once more, her expression twisted in irritation. Seated beside her, already adjusting his duffel under the seat, was Keanu. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. Letting out a theatrical sigh, she took her seat beside him, clearly displeased. "What are the chances?" Keanu turned slightly, giving her a knowing look. "I'd say about 1 in 100, but here we are." She scoffed and waved down a flight attendant before even fastening her seatbelt. "Excuse me, is there any way to switch seats?" The young attendant checked the manifest and gave an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hawthorne, but the cabin is full. Would you like a pre-flight drink instead?" Veronica's jaw tightened, and she forced a polite smile. "Champagne, the best you have." The attendant nodded and turned to Keanu. "And for you, sir?" "Just water, please," Keanu replied simply. Veronica chuckled, shaking her head. "Of course." Keanu glanced at her. "Something funny?" She waved a manicured hand. "It's just water? You're in first class, you know. You might as well enjoy the perks. Unless..." She paused, then smirked. "Unless this is your first time up here?" Keanu's lips twitched, barely concealing his amusement. "You could say I've been around." She leaned back, swirling her champagne as she studied him. "So, what do you do?" Keanu, placing his water bottle on the tray table, replied calmly, "I work in film." Veronica's eyes lit up with understanding, her previous skepticism replaced with curiosity. "Ah, you're an aspiring actor. That makes sense." She nodded to herself as if she had finally solved a puzzle. "Trying to make it in Hollywood? Hustling for auditions?" Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Something like that." Veronica sipped her champagne, looking pleased with herself for having figured him out. Well, best of luck with that. Just know, success isn't about talent. It's about knowing the right people. The world doesn't hand you opportunities. People like me, we create them. Keanu turned to her, his expression unreadable. Interesting philosophy. She smiled, mistaking his neutrality for agreement. Exactly. Stick with the right crowd and you might actually get somewhere. Keanu didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back, watching as the other passengers settled in. He could already tell this was going to be an interesting flight. What Veronica didn't know was that by the time they landed, she would never look at the world the same way again. The flight to Paris was well underway, cruising smoothly through the night sky. The soft hum of the engines filled the cabin, punctuated by the occasional chime of the flight attendant call button. The luxurious first-class section was dimly lit, designed for relaxation, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered between two passengers who couldn't have been more different. Keanu Reeves sat comfortably by the window, his gaze drifting beyond the glass, lost in the sea of twinkling city lights below. His worn leather jacket was slung casually over the seat, and his boots, though clean, had clearly seen their share of roads. Across from him sat Veronica Hawthorne, a prominent Wall Street executive known for her ruthless ambition. Dressed in a designer power suit, her jewelry subtle yet expensive, she radiated the kind of presence that demanded attention, and she made sure to get it. As the flight attendant approached with a tray of drinks, Veronica barely glanced up. "A bottle of your finest Bordeaux," she said smoothly, "and make sure it's properly chilled." The attendant nodded politely and turned to Keanu. "And for you, sir?" "Just water, please," Keanu replied simply, offering a kind smile. Veronica let out a small, sharp laugh, as if she had just heard an inside joke only she understood. "Water? Seriously?" She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. "You're in first class, yet you order the most basic thing on the menu. Fascinating." Keanu chuckled softly, unfazed. "Sometimes simplicity is all you need." Veronica swirled her glass as she watched the crimson liquid catch the light. "Simplicity," she repeated, tasting the word as if it were a foreign concept. "That's an interesting perspective. But let's be real here, shall we? People in first class aren't here for simplicity. We're here because we've earned the right to luxury. You don't just stumble into this kind of life." Keanu glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "And what kind of life is that?" "The life where you're at the top," Veronica said matter-of-factly. "The best seats, the best service, the best everything. You either have it or you don't." Keanu took a sip of his water before responding. "Maybe the best isn't about what you have, but how you live." Veronica smirked, leaning back in her seat. "That sounds like something people say when they don't have much." He didn't react to the jab. Instead, he turned back to the window, letting the silence settle between them. But Veronica wasn't done. She thrived on control, on knowing exactly where she stood in relation to others. And right now, this man, with his quiet confidence, unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "So," she continued, swirling her wine lazily, "what do you do exactly?" "Something tells me you're not the CEO type." Keanu glanced at her, his gaze calm. "I work in film." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I see. Documentaries? Small indie projects?" Keanu shrugged. "Something like that." She laughed, a sound laced with condescension. "Interesting. But you know, not everyone is meant for certain spaces. First class, for instance. Some people just don't belong, no matter how hard they try." Keanu turned to look at her fully now. His face remained composed, but his eyes held a quiet depth, a weight that made Veronica's amusement falter. "I think we all belong wherever we are at the moment," he said simply. "Life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be. Veronica huffed as if dismissing a foolish thought. That's a cute philosophy, but the real world doesn't work that way. You either make it or you get left behind. Keanu didn't argue. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, and that unnerved her more than anything. She had built her life on sharp words and sharper deals, but something about this man's stillness made her feel exposed. The tension in the cabin thickened as Keanu Reeves remained effortlessly calm, while Veronica Hawthorne grew more irritated. Her piercing eyes scanned him, searching for some sign of discomfort, some indication that she had gotten under his skin. But Keanu simply sipped his water, unmoved by her superiority complex. Veronica swirled the wine in her glass, her voice dripping with mock amusement. "You know, life is like flying first class," she mused, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "You work hard, prove yourself, and then you earn your place. Some people, though, well, some people just seem to stumble into spaces meant for others." Keanu placed his water bottle on the tray table and turned slightly toward her, his expression still unreadable. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. He had remained patient, but now he was ready to respond. "Luck or hard work," Keanu said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "We all land in the same place when the flight ends." A few heads turned. The surrounding passengers who had been discreetly eavesdropping were now fully invested. The flight attendant, pouring coffee for a nearby couple, slowed her movements, her eyes flickering toward them. Veronica chuckled, though it was tighter this time. "That's a cute perspective, but let's be honest here. Some of us are on a different level. Not everyone understands what it takes to be successful." Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Success isn't just about what you have," he said, gesturing toward the luxury seats around them. "It's about how you treat people." A hush settled over the immediate area. Several passengers exchanged glances, nodding in quiet agreement. The young woman across the aisle, who had been scrolling through her phone, now looked at Keanu with newfound respect. Even the flight attendant, who had seen her fair share of entitled first-class travelers, seemed to pause. Veronica, however, wasn't ready to back down. She smirked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. "That's a nice little self-help speech. Maybe you should try motivational speaking." Keanu offered a small smile but said nothing, turning his gaze toward the window. His silence held more weight than any retort could. The surrounding passengers began reacting more visibly. Some murmured amongst themselves, others shot disapproving looks at Veronica. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit, seated a few rows ahead, shook his head slightly, unimpressed by her arrogance. Veronica shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, she noticed the change in the atmosphere. She wasn't winning this exchange. She was becoming the spectacle. Determined to reclaim control, she leaned in. "You know what's funny?" she said, lowering her voice slightly. "It's always the ones with nothing to show who talk the loudest about humility. Ever notice that?" Keanu met her gaze, his expression soft but unwavering. "I've noticed that the people who talk the most about what they have are usually the ones who feel the emptiest inside." A brief silence followed, thick, lingering. The words had hit their mark. Veronica opened her mouth, but nothing came out immediately. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. The passengers around them exchanged knowing glances. A woman in her 60s, sitting a row behind, nodded approvingly. Even the flight attendant, now standing near the galley, smiled faintly before turning back to her duties. Veronica took a slow sip of her wine, using it as a shield. She let out a forced laugh. "Well, that's an interesting perspective." Keanu simply inclined his head slightly, as if granting her the space to sit with her own thoughts. The hum of the aircraft engines filled the cabin as the moment stretched on. Veronica, usually in control of every conversation she engaged in, found herself at a loss. She had entered this exchange believing she was the one teaching a lesson. But somehow, without even raising his voice, Keanu had turned the mirror back on her. For the first time, she felt exposed. The flight attendant approached Keanu with a polite smile. Her voice, though quiet, seemed to ring through the cabin like a bell. "Mr. Reeves, the captain asked me to inform you that your connection in Paris is confirmed. He also sends his best regards." The name Reeves rippled through the cabin like a shock wave. Passengers who had previously been content to spectate now leaned forward, murmurs rising among them. Veronica, her face still drained of color, stiffened. She blinked once, twice, as if struggling to process what she had just heard. "Reeves," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. And then, louder, with growing disbelief, "Keanu Reeves." Keanu nodded politely to the flight attendant before turning back to Veronica, his expression still unreadable. "Is something wrong, Veronica?" he asked, his voice gentle but pointed. Veronica opened her mouth but found no words. She looked around, taking in the hushed whispers, the subtle glances cast in her direction. The realization of what had just happened, of who she had just spent the last hour belittling, settled on her like a crushing weight. She swallowed hard, her carefully curated confidence now a distant memory. I had no idea," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were." Keanu's expression didn't change. "I didn't think it was necessary. I don't usually introduce myself with my name." Veronica's gaze dropped to her lap. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something unfamiliar. Shame. The certainty she had clung to, the belief that success was about power, appearances, dominance, felt suddenly fragile, paper-thin under the weight of reality. The flight continued in heavy silence. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, throwing Veronica subtle but pointed glances. She barely noticed. Her mind was racing, replaying every word she had spoken, every assumption she had made. She had spent her life proving herself, building an empire, making sure everyone knew she belonged in places like this. But now, sitting beside the one man who had effortlessly unraveled her, she wondered, had she really been proving anything at all? Keanu didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered, and Veronica was left alone with the weight of it. As the plane began its descent, Veronica took a deep breath and gathered her courage. She turned to Keanu, her voice softer than it had been all flight. "I need to apologize, not because of who you are, but because of who I've been. I was arrogant. I acted like a fool." Keanu closed his book and looked at her, his expression as composed as ever. He studied her for a moment before nodding. "I appreciate the apology," he said, his tone sincere. "But more than that, I hope you take something from this." Veronica let out a small, humorless laugh. "Believe me, I will." She hesitated before adding, "You've given me a lot to think about." Keanu offered a small, knowing smile. Sometimes, what we search for most in life is what we find least within ourselves. I hope you figure out what truly matters. Veronica didn't reply right away. She simply nodded, allowing his words to sink in. As the plane touched down, she felt something shift within her, a sense of discomfort, yes, but also an opportunity. Maybe it was time to start seeing the world differently. As they disembarked, Veronica lingered in the terminal, watching Keanu as he moved through the crowd. She saw people approaching him, whispering excitedly, asking for photos. Yet he treated each interaction with patience and kindness, never rushing, never acting superior. It was evident now, his humility wasn't an act, it was who he was. Veronica looked down at her own hands and sighed. She had spent so much time trying to climb the social ladder only to realize too late that she had been climbing the wrong one. Keanu's words lingered in her mind, a reminder that a person's worth isn't about their wealth, but about how they treat others. As Keanu disappeared into the crowd, Veronica felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Maybe this encounter wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it was the wake-up call she needed. In the end, we all carry choices that shape who we become. Do we live to impress others, or do we strive to be better? Keanu's message was clear. True success isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by the kindness and respect we extend to others. True success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by how we treat others. In a world obsessed with appearances, humility and kindness remain the greatest strengths. We often judge people too quickly, failing to see their true value. Keanu's story reminds us that respect shouldn't depend on titles or material possessions. Instead, it's about character, empathy, and lifting others up instead of tearing them down. Before assuming someone's worth, take a step back, listen, understand, and treat them with dignity. In the end, the legacy we leave isn't what we own, but how we impact the lives of others. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe True Tapes channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you.